Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of finding the right therapy for OCD. And really, more than any other disorder, OCD is very unique in that it requires a very specific type of therapy and approach that isn't really taught in graduate programs. And I have no idea why OCD is so barely touched in graduate school. It's really unfair and horrible. But therapists have to go out and get their own training typically. There are some graduate programs that have a great ERP program, but not typically. And so as a parent, we have to do our due diligence to really research what are the appropriate evidence-based approaches for OCD. How do I spot this in a therapist? And how do I get that treatment for my child? And so I do have this amazing family that was brave enough to come onto the podcast today and talk about their experience with OCD, their experience in finding treatment, going through several therapists before they can find the right treatment. And luckily, they knew what they were looking for on some level. They knew that they at least were dealing with OCD. And that was fortunate because a lot of people don't even know that they're dealing with OCD, get into the wrong therapist. The wrong therapist makes it worse, and they spend years and years and a lot of money wasting time, energy, and finances when the therapists are unintentionally making the situation worse. So I want to save you that time and money. And I think we can do that through storytelling. I feel like this is a really great story of kind of showing that. So before we get started, we jump into their story. It's a teen and her father. I think you're going to really enjoy them. I want to make a couple of announcements. My AT Parenting community is open. It's actually open just for the next 2 days. So if you've been meaning to join or you want to join, you can check it out at atparentingcommunity.com. And let me see, today's Tuesday, the 23rd, and it closes on the 25th of 2024. So we open it about 4 times a year, and you can always get on the wait list if you're listening to this outside of that time period. You can go to atparentingcommunity.com. If you're looking for in-depth support, and, if you're trying to find the right therapist, this is like the AT Parenting community does a whole bunch of different stuff. It is a membership community. So it's the cost of a copay, $30 a month. And for that, there's so much in the community that really parents tend to zone in on one or two things that they really find beneficial. And they tap into those because there's just so much in the community that you have at your fingertips. We do weekly Zoom classes, and it's normally a pretty nice intimate group of maybe 15, 20 parents where you guys can ask me questions and you vote on the topic. And so that's what I teach that week, so the topics change every week. We also have monthly Zoom support group calls. We have those for the parents, and that's just for parents to support parents, and I chime in and give you my support. We have one for the kids, and we have one for the teens. So sometimes parents just sign up for the community just for the support group calls, because support groups in general can cost you way more than $30 a month if you're doing it with a local practice. And so sometimes parents find that in and of itself is valuable. But the weekly live classes to learn and talk to other parents, some parents actually just want a lot of resources. And as an AT Parenting community member, you get free access to a ton of my courses. So we have a member website, and in the member website, you can log on and you can access my classes, like how to teach kids to crush OCD, how to teach kids to crush anxiety, how to use the SPACE program, how to handle difficult behavior caused by anxiety or OCD. These are all classes that are in my online school at atparentingsurvivalschool.com that are $127 classes. You get free access to all of those. Not all of my courses, but a big chunk of them, actually, over $500 worth of courses that you get access to as a member. So some parents just want to dive into that, and they feel wow, that's just more feasible $30 a month than spending $127 for a course. You have free access to it as long as you're a member. So that's a huge benefit too. The other thing that I think some parents just join for this is that in the member website, we have forums. And the forums are kind of like a bulletin board, or like think of it as kind of a Reddit type of thing. It's private though. You have to log in as a member. And that's a direct warm line to me. And so you can create your own thread. You can talk to me. You can ask me questions. A lot of times parents will say, hey, I'm trying out this therapist. Can you go on their website and tell me if this looks, like they have the credentials? And I'm happy to do that. Some parents are using the membership as a supplement to therapy. And so they might talk about how they can create things at home, or how they're doing ERP, or they might be talking about how their child's not motivated. And I just walk them through that in there. It's also kind of like a database because you can search other people's questions, and there's thousands and thousands of threads with different topics. And so that can be really helpful as well. So I would love to see you over there. You only have a couple of days because we do like to focus on our members that are currently there. So we close the doors so that it's not disruptive. And that way we know when we're welcoming new people, and then we know when we're really focusing on our members that are currently there. So check it out, atparentingcommunity.com. I would love to see you over there. Okay, I'd also like to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. And spoiler alert, actually NoCD becomes a big discussion in this episode when I'm talking to this family. So you'll hear about that as well. In fact, you'll hear about it now. So without further ado, here's my interview. Well, I want to welcome John and Eve to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, parents love to hear stories of other people that have gone through similar things. It just really helps normalize the experience. I think we all, and speaking as a mom and not a therapist right now, I feel like we all think we're in our own little alone boxes that, we're experiencing this by ourselves. And people like you coming on and sharing their experiences help validate other people's experiences and let them know they're not alone. So I wonder if we can jump in and start talking about, I don't know if we want to talk about your experience first, John, or are we going to talk about Eve? Because you both have kind of your own overlapping experience.
I think, if I may say, why don't we start with Eve, because her story kind of opened up my story.
That makes sense.
So Eve, do you want to kick it off, or would you like me to do it?
I mean, I can totally start.
Yeah.
And then, if you have anything, yeah. So I started having some OCD symptoms when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, I would say. And it would kind of pop in and out a little bit, kind of at night when I was just like laying in my bed and thinking about like what I had to do and all of that stuff. Especially in middle school, it's really hard. And then it kind of would not be as bad later on. And then eventually it started getting really bad during COVID. Because when COVID started, I was a sophomore in high school. And so I kind of was cut off from all my friends. I didn't really have, I had my family at home, but that was kind of it. So it started getting bad, I would say, the summer of 2020. And then I didn't really tell anybody, though. I dealt with it on my own. I did a lot of compulsions on my own, which, as we know, not the best idea. But yeah, it got really bad, I would say, my junior year. And that's when I ended up talking to my parents about it. And from then on, I think just having a support system kind of helped. And then it would still kind of be around a lot through junior and senior year. And then finally, my freshman year of college is when we found NOCD. And that has really been a game changer for me, I would say. It's been life-changing. So,
And I'm glad that you found the right treatment, because that is actually a huge part of the struggle, I think, for most people. And we'll get there. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. That was a good framework.
yeah.
What were some of the initial signs? What were some of the initial OCD things that you were having? that you were suffering with by yourself?
Ooh. So definitely I would just kind of overthink of conversations a lot that I would have with people. And I would kind of keep playing them back in my head and I would kind of basically just keep thinking of everything wrong that I said in the conversation, or maybe something that I shouldn't have said, which doesn't really matter. People don't really care. People are more thinking about themselves. But I would kind of just keep like having these conversations in my head. And yeah, I kind of think of the worst outcome of it mostly is just like whatever I said, like, would I lose a friend over it? Would my family hate me for it? Would whatever. But once you start ruminating about all of that, it kind of really just goes downhill.
Yeah. And then you can just go through like the history of conversations you have ever had. Yeah, there's like a huge database to ruminate over. Did you know that you were struggling with OCD, or what did you think at first?
So I was diagnosed with anxiety my junior year. But we didn't know it was OCD for a long time. I think it took us like a solid other year. And
Yeah.
I remember this one story of when it was like 4 in the morning. I was downstairs and I was kind of having a panic attack. I was really, really stressed. And I ended up kind of looking up some of the symptoms I had. And we ended up kind of figuring out what I had from it. But we didn't really have the right resources for it yet. But we just ended up knowing exactly what I had. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe I can add a little bit more to the story too, because and Eve, you got to tell me if you're open to me talking a little bit more about some of the other symptoms you were having or not,
Yeah, we can talk about it.
because that sort of opens up my story as well. So, not only was Eve having this concerns about relationships and was she harming her relationships, and would she lose those relationships, or all that, which probably, to a teenager could seem like, oh, those are normal, right? I mean, like, what teenager is not thinking about that? But at some point, she also started to, begin to question whether she was attracted to women. And her entire life had been built upon, absolute fascination and crushes on boys and all this stuff. And so it was super personal to her. It was like, as we all know, after we've learned about OCD, that OCD hits you where it hurts the most,
Mm-hmm.
where the things that you're most fragile, or the things you believe so much about yourself, that the pain of it forcing you to think something else about yourself is overwhelming.
Yeah.
So the piece of information that Eve had discovered was she Googled symptoms specifically to that.
Yes, yeah.
That makes more
And
sense.
when
Yeah.
she discovered it, it was like, oh my God, this is me. I must have this. And at about the same time, she had finally shared what was going on with her. And so between what she had shared and seeing this in writing, I, as a parent, I started to really understand what was going on. But in my case, what that made me realize too is I had the same exact thing happen to me. Now, later in my life, I was a junior in college. You're welcome anytime, Natasha, if you want me to stop talking and you want to ask a question, but I'll just keep going until you do.
Yeah, no, this is all
Yeah.
really interesting.
So back in between my junior year and senior year of college, I started experiencing these things that I'd never experienced in my entire life. And it was debilitating. I had a job at the Chicago Board of Trade for the summer. I'd worked really hard to get this internship, and I get into this environment and it's like 99% men, and I'm freaking out. I had always been heterosexual. I'd always been attracted to women. I had many serious relationships, and I had no control over my thoughts anymore. And like I said, it was debilitating, and I had to go home, and I was homebound, and it was overwhelming. And it took years to kind of work it through, and get comfortable, and put myself back out there. And honestly, it was really through my relationship with my wife where everything sort of settled, and I became again a little bit comfortable in my own skin. So now imagine 20, 16, 17, 20 years later, because she's our youngest. And my daughter brings up this concept and this condition that I had never shared with anyone
Well, and did
about
you
me.
even know? So that whole time, did you even know that even could be OCD? Or were you just like, I
No,
had some weird identity crisis that was just
yes,
overwhelming?
that's exactly what I thought. I went to a therapist. I'm sure I was on some kind of, whatever was an anxiety med back then. But it was a traditional therapist, right? And it was like, time will heal. Time will heal, and you got to get back into your life and everything will get back to normal. And it was very difficult. So I had no idea it was OCD.
Yeah, I would think not, especially back then. But even nowadays, like the fact that Eve, you were able to Google it and find something that validated that actually makes me feel pretty hopeful because I feel like
Mhm.
sexual orientation OCD is like not talked about enough, and it's not even in like OCD in general is not, it's still not where it should be, but it's getting better. But I feel like these more like quote unquote taboo topics like
Right.
um, sexual orientation or POCD, like these topics that people are like they don't want to talk about.
Mhm.
You must
Because
have
it's so personable. It's so like how you've defined yourself and how you've represented yourself and how people see you.
yeah.
And honestly, not that there is anything wrong
No.
with
Yeah.
the alternative, but to you, it's overwhelming. It's devastating. It's disabling.
Because it's not who you are. And I think that's the key of this. And that's kind of the key with identity issues around OCD is it's not necessarily you have an issue with the alternative of what OCD is saying you are, but it's the incongruency of it of like, I know who I am, but then OCD is like, but what if you're not? And then it
Right.
just and it messes with your head. Well, and I can
Right.
imagine going through traditional therapy back in the day. I mean, a lot of times, if they're doing like psychodynamic work or psychotherapy, it's, maybe subconsciously. I mean, like I could see where therapy could go in a way that would, even today, unfortunately, where the wrong therapist can really validate these concerns by trying to explore it in a very like authentic way, like taking
Yeah.
it for face value
Yeah.
can be a big struggle too.
Yes. 100%. That's exactly right. They're doing what they are trained, and also, their intuition of how to help a person get through it. But what we've learned, your profession has learned, is for this type of, I don't want to know what I want to call it, a disorder, that doesn't work. It
Yeah,
can actually make it worse.
it can make it a lot worse, especially this theme. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think you're right. But I think it takes a very brave human to speak it out loud, so that they can actually be talking about the right things to
Mhm.
whoever's trying to treat them. And
Yes.
Eve went to a therapist and a psychiatrist.
Yep. I did
And
it
Eve,
all.
did you ever tell them what was really going on?
No, I couldn't do it. I would talk to my therapist about everything else in my life, but I couldn't do it. It was so weird. Like it's kind of hard. It's really hard to just like say it and put yourself out there and like have people not think you're crazy when you say it. That's my biggest thing was I always felt like I was crazy when I would tell people.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is just because it's not talked about enough. It's not normalized enough. Like these other types of OCD themes are not discussed. So did you see just a regular therapist and like a general type of
Yeah,
therapist?
I
Yeah.
saw a couple. One when my parents had just found out, when I just told my parents, they set me up with a therapist right away. But as we have learned, you really have to find a good therapist for yourself. And you have to get the right type of therapist for yourself. And so the first one was not the right type of therapist for myself. And then we found another one that I ended up really liking, but I just couldn't tell her.
Yeah.
What was the biggest struggle with the first one?
I just think it was the way that she kind of held our conversations and the way therapy is. And I need a person that's very like emotional and has a lot of like emotional like intelligency, like an EQ instead of IQ kind of more. I don't know if my dad can add on, but I'm very like I think with my heart kind of and not as much my head. And so I needed somebody to kind of be able to there just to like
Yeah.
back it up more a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could give you a personal example on my side,
Sure.
which is very, very much like you. So when I first experienced this and I had a therapist, it was warm, welcoming, supportive. And that's who I dealt with over the summer. When I went back to school, I felt like I needed somebody. So I went to the health department at the school and signed up for an appointment with a therapist. And in my first appointment, literally, I think in the first 5 minutes, it was like, tell me about your mother. And I'm like, all right, I'm out of here. So,
Oh boy.
but that, for somebody, that might have been the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the important thing here that I'm trying to emphasize, and you know so well, I'm sure, Natasha, that there is the right type of therapy for you, but there is the right type of person to be helping you with that process also. And I would really encourage for people, for themselves and for their children, to find the right person with the right type of therapy for them as they're working through a challenge.
Yeah. And I feel like that is just so important, especially in some OCD themes where you can have the most empathetic, kind-hearted therapist who is brilliant and is so effective with most of their clients, but they don't have the training on how to treat OCD. And when you have like sexual orientation OCD, or you have harm OCD, or you are having, intrusive thoughts about harming yourself or harming other people, or your identity, or doing things that are inappropriate to other things or other people, a typical therapist might deem that as like suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation, or gender like dysphoria, or there's all sorts of other possibilities. And unfortunately, when you spend a whole session, exploring, well, I wonder what that means to you, or why you like girls, or let's talk about that. That's actually kind of doing joint compulsions the whole session, because you're ruminating together. And so you wind up thinking, why isn't therapy working? Or even more scary, which I'm not hearing from your story, you're referred to a higher level of care for suicidal ideation, or your parents are told that you're like disturbed because you have these really gross, intrusive thoughts, when they're incredibly common with OCD.
Right. It's exactly it. Now, I don't think Eve ever got to that point because she never got comfortable enough to tell somebody, her therapist. So she didn't really give the therapist a chance. And I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Because it's such a painful thought to really open yourself up to it. But I mean, imagine if you're someone with OCD and the therapist is taking you down this path, and it's like forcing you into these thoughts that you are so afraid of. I mean, imagine the pain that could create. Not saying that it will always happen that way. And there's no intention there.
There's no intention. It's just a lack of education.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, your story, you were super lucky because you went into therapy knowing what it was. Like, you knew it was OCD, but you couldn't convey that to the therapist. And the therapist wasn't skilled enough, because they were not OCD therapists, to let you know. Because like sometimes as an OCD therapist, I'll have someone on my couch and they'll be telling me all sorts of things, but I can feel like I'm not touching. It's almost like when you just started talking and you told me that you worry about other people thinking. I'm like, no, we're missing something in her story. Like you can just tell intuitively that we're missing a component. And I would go in and I would normalize some taboo themes as an example and then I would wait for the big eye opening. I would say a couple things, to tweens and teens. And then I could tell I would hit one and they'd be like, they would shift or their eyes would open a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, that one's a common one too. I mean, if you have that, we can talk about that one too. And so like sometimes getting an invitation to discuss those themes, to realize that you're not the only one. And because sometimes you just need a little invitation, and then then the floodgates can open.
Yeah. I can imagine the relief in in their their whole body. Because
Yeah.
is it okay if I tell you a little bit about how we ended up finding her some support?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So, and then, I'll let Eve tell you about her experience when we did. Um, so, all right. So we're sitting here in this time period in high school in COVID, and she knows she has OCD. Dad's like, oh, holy shit, excuse my language. I have OCD.
Yeah, that was healing.
We have the same experience. And there's a little bit of guilt on my side about it, but we don't need to deal with that right now. So now at least we have an understanding, and I'm able to do the best that I can do to support her when she needs it. But I don't know how to really help her other than to relate. And, so she goes up, she's so freaking brave. Anybody with OCD is like, that deals with it and survives it. And even if they don't survive it, how brave they are to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's so brave. I warned her. I warned her that there might be tears.
Oh.
So we got her off to college, and she's surviving and doing great, meeting great friends. And she wanted to join a sorority. And I knew how difficult that was going to be.
Yeah.
And so she started doing it, and she got into a sorority. But the process was just so overwhelming because she's meeting so many people and all these. And I don't know if there was one moment or two, but calls from the bathroom, hiding in the bathroom, tears. And we realized at that point that she wasn't getting the help that she needed. And our healthcare offers telehealth, which was going to be great, right? Because I'm not sure she was really able to talk in person,
Mm-hmm.
as we saw. And so I started to go down the path of trying to find her a therapist using one of these telehealth services. And I was basically like pretending to be her. I logged in. I was doing it for her because I don't think, and I don't mean to put words, I don't mean to talk badly or anything, but I felt like I needed to advocate for her because she wasn't quite ready there for herself. And so we're trying to find a therapist, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to find you a therapist. We'll be back in touch with you. 4 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. We find a therapist. And I had specified in there that I want somebody that knows how to deal with somebody with OCD. First person that comes back 2 weeks later, nothing about OCD. I wanted somebody that was warm, caring, female, blah, 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 specified it. And I'm sure they were trying, but they couldn't find it. I said, no, I want somebody like this for me. I know what I need. 2 weeks, no answer. She's going downhill as this is happening. And finally, I go, it's just not working. And I Google OCD therapy expertise. Oof, no CD.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, there's a business built all around helping people with OCD. And I click in. And so I don't want this to be perceived as an advertisement for no CD, but I want people to understand how liberating it was to find them.
It is. It's like a light in the darkness, because before no CD was around, there wasn't anything that would have popped up on your screen instantaneously. That would have been a solution that would have been evidence-based that you could really count on.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And they have this button, schedule a call, talk to us 15 minutes. And literally in an hour, I'm on the phone with somebody who has OCD themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody does, but somebody that can empathize in a way that not all people can. And I'm describing the characteristics, and she's like, oh, yeah, when can I talk to your daughter? And, we had to do a little bit of scheduling because Eve was busy. But within, I think, 2 days, she was on the phone with this person. And, I'll let her pick it up. Like, how did she feel from that first conversation?
I think from the second that I kind of told them, or my dad told them, and they emphasized that I had OCD, it was so much relief.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like I wasn't crazy and I had something that was backed up by evidence that people could say I for sure had. And it was so nice. It was like a weight off my chest. I could be like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, this is normal. People have this all the time.
Yeah, I think the validation part is like, that's like 50% of the treatment. I think just like knowing you're not alone and getting that external validation of like, yes, clinically you have OCD and you're not crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember her talking about, I'm the one crying now, but I remember you talking about the tears that you had, and within a few weeks we had a therapist lined up, somebody that could practice in Indiana and could work with her where she is,
Mm-hmm.
and she was on a path to get it under control. Knowing that it's always anybody that has a child or has experienced it themselves knows it's never gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it can spike depending on situations, but it was starting to dissipate and get under control. And when it flared, she'd know what to do.
And that is really the key, is like just, and I mean, that's what I want for my kids too, and I even see this with my 12-year-old already, who has had lots of themes. And that one was a hard theme for her, is, do you recognize when OCD pops up? Because it'll come with many different disguises. And I mean, she becomes her own little mini therapist even at 12 because she has the skills of, oh, I need to do an exposure. Or I'm like, why are you doing that? It's an exposure, mom. I'm just doing it. Just leave me alone, and just having those, so that, and that's just what you needed, is just a person who is going to supercharge your understanding of how you tackle this. And then if it comes back, or if you have another OCD theme, to me, it's never typically as bad as the first, because it's like you have a roadmap and you kind of know what to expect more. And so that helps. But having those tools is really important.
I wish I could go back in time and know CD, or you as a practicing OCD, therapist. I wish I had known that there was something like this and that there was a way to get past it. It was really, for me, time, and a loving, welcoming girlfriend who became my wife. And I just worked through it. And I will say it's been much harder, as hard as it was personally. I mean, it's devastating to go through, but God, to see your child suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And to know what it's like, that's been so much more difficult.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
it's helpful for our kids to hear it from this like third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of like holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was like the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Yeah, I think that is really hard because you're watching it, you know what it feels like, but yet you can't do it for them. It's like they have to do the work, and you can't take that pain away. So
You can't. Yeah, you can't.
So Eve, can you tell us a little bit about what therapy then looked like for you?
Yeah, of course. So I went in with a therapist here in Indiana through telehealth. And those first couple therapy sessions were basically on like discovering new tools and kind of, they call it ERP, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct? Yeah. And it's kind of just leading you up to being able to like identify when you're having bad OCD and the steps that you can take to kind of make it decrease, kind of get yourself back to it never goes away, obviously, it never goes away, but get yourself back to a place where you feel better. And through ERP and through kind of the like the tools, but kind of, I don't know how to we kind of just like worked through each individual step. And I think it's like a 5-week process, but at the end of it, I was so happy. When I went home, I felt like almost a completely different person, just from the fact of I knew exactly what I had to do if it spiked, and I knew how to control it better, and I knew kind of that I would be okay.
Yeah,
And that was the biggest thing. Yeah.
5 weeks. Wow.
Was it 5 weeks? I don't know.
Maybe it was like 2 months or something.
It was pretty intense. I mean, it was definitely intense because she was about to come home and they wanted to try to pack a lot into a short time period.
And I like the way that they can do that. That they can do like a couple of sessions per week. Is that what you were doing? A few sessions?
Yeah, I think it was like 2 per week or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's really like intensive outpatient at that point almost.
I think I needed it though. I needed to get all my tools, and that was the best way for me to do it. And I think if it took me like a week, or I did one per week and it was a couple months, I think it wouldn't have been as impactful for me.
Yeah, I do think the intensity can sometimes help too.
She's not to lead the witness, but she's back in it.
And
it's been very helpful to continue on as well.
So are you able to just then go back to the same therapist that you were seeing? Is that how they work?
yeah, so I'm able to go back to the therapist that I see, and I see her still about once a week. I really like seeing her every week. I've learned that if I do every other week and something stressful happens, obviously my OCD spikes, but talking to her allows it to be, I think, not as big of a spike.
Yeah.
And so also just telling her how I'm feeling and my thoughts and everything. And she's been amazing. She's been such a life-changing therapist for me.
That's awesome. It's always so good to hear that, because I think that's what people are searching for out there. And so there's not like a limit to how many sessions you can have, right? With an OCD, you can just see the therapist ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I don't know what I'll say is I don't know if my insurance I haven't looked that closely. Like I don't know if the insurance stops at a certain point and it just becomes, from the bank of mom and dad, or if you're an individual out in the real world and you're just covering your costs. I don't know that piece, but I do know that the mental health of my daughter is worth every penny that I could ever spend. And
well, and I mean, the fact that you're even using your insurance is like a beautiful thing. Because therapy is expensive and most OCD therapists don't take insurance. And so I know I'm paying out of pocket. I think I'm paying $440 a week because I have 2 kids in therapy. And that's fine. I rather that's number one priority. But what I do love about no OCD is that they do take insurance. And so a lot of people are paying insurance. I mean, my insurance will pay I think forever. I think I could see a therapist as much as we wanted. So hopefully that's the case for you too. I don't know.
It's possible that it is that way. And I wish I could give you a little bit more clear thought because I'm sure that this is for some people, a big struggle. It's like, I need to, as a parent, right? I know I need to pay for I know my child needs this and I want to do it for him, but can I afford it? So I know that's a big concern. I wish I had a little bit more information for you about that.
Well, and it's different for each insurance plan. And I mean, a lot of people listen to this globally.
Right.
They don't even have insurance or they have more government insurance. So, but there are parents who just can't pay that, couple $100 a week, even if they wanted to. It's, they can't make it come from nothing. And I think that is the benefit of no OCD because and I'm not in my private practice anymore. I just do global resources because my hope is just connecting people who really there's a barrier or there's an access to care. And also just what's the parent supposed to do? That aspect isn't always covered in therapy, but I will say I can almost say this, there's almost no good OCD therapists who take insurance, because it's such a niche, it's such a specified training. You don't get OCD training in graduate school typically. You have to go out and get your own training postgraduate. And so you have to invest your own time and money in training. And when you get that specialty, you're like, all right, well, I'm the only person in my entire state that really specializes in OCD or pediatric or teen OCD. I can charge whatever I want. And they do, and I understand that because we are unicorns, but I feel what no OCD is doing is bridging that gap because no OCD is getting those expert OCD clinicians and putting them in their network and then taking insurance and then keeping up the training with the clinician. And so that people you can just Google and it just pops up. No OCD is in front of every YouTube video I create. I have a YouTube channel and it's they're not sponsoring my YouTube channel, but they pop up, in front of my YouTube
because of the content.
Yeah, they know how to disseminate OCD information. They pop up in your Google search, and I've spoken to Stephen Smith, who's the creator of NoCD, and very rarely do you find a company that has a really good heart behind it, someone who has authentic goal and their own personal story of OCD and wanting people to have access to care. Yeah, it's just really cool to hear your story and that you just Googled it and you're paying insurance. And you have a great therapist.
Yeah, it was a miracle. It really was. And even beyond that, I reached out to Stephen individually and thanked him for, one, starting a company that does this, and two, for the great work that they're doing for my daughter and the clarity that it brought to me and what was going on with me, many years ago. And probably to some, there's still times that stuff pops up for me even, and just being able to recognize that. But the other thing that I was so impressed with Stephen was one, that he's running a big company. He'd respond to me. He'd talk to me. We had several conversations. And as I was learning about NoCD, I don't know if you've had a chance to do this or anybody that's learning about the company, to see the growth of him as a human from when he started the company. I watched videos to see, as I was researching him, basically to get to know him, his story when he was like in his 20s, late, you could see the maturity of a human and the confidence that he had about himself and how he's dealing with his own OCD, and yet freeing up the lives and the mental health of thousands, millions of people out there. It's just a great story. And I know it's not just him. It's the people that deliver the service. It's the executives around him. It's the dedicated people that are doing customer intakes, like the woman that spoke to me and my daughter and got us in, ASAP. It's everyone that's dedicated to helping people that are really dealing with this really tough issue. And people like you are getting the messages out so that parents don't have to be alone in dealing with such a troubling, challenging issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is phenomenal. And I feel like there's a passion that often comes with people who have OCD that and you might find this to happen to you, Eve, as well. It's like people find their voice and they want to pay it forward, and they do their part in whatever way. And I've seen this time, there are so many, and Stephen is one of them, like similar story, college. And I remember talking to him when he just had an app, and he reached out to me to help me. He's like, hey, I want to support you. I noticed that you're in the OCD community. And I was like, who is this guy calling me? And he was like shy and very nice and wanting to support me, and just random, just wanting to support anyone who's helping other people with OCD. And I think when you start with that passion, and then it's blown up in a very short period of time to the point where it's really changed the face of how people get OCD care, because it's global. And so, but there are a lot of young advocates. I see a lot of people with Instagram accounts who are OCD influencers, and people making like OCD t-shirts and OCD, like, and they all have their OCD story. Not that you have to do that, but I think people want to normalize it, and they want to spread that word, because they were so impacted. And so I do feel like there's a lot of people in a lot of worlds, like in OCD, like the person that you talk to, or like the therapist, who have their own lived experience on some level. And you find that a lot, I think, especially in the OCD community, more than anywhere else, is we all have our own stories, or at least the ones that are really vocal, because there's a passion that's driving it, whether it's our own story or our kids' story, or we're in the trenches on some level. And then we're like, we want to help other people. And I think that's part of the OCD brain, is like just this compassion to want to help other people.
yeah, I'll ask you, because you know so much more than I do. Is there something more overwhelming about this thing? Because I don't want to diminish any other issues, because there's so many tough issues out there. But is there something that's just, I don't know, all consuming or overwhelming or just so disabling about OCD, that maybe when people learn that they're not alone, or that there's ways to help themselves, that makes them want to help people in a bigger, better way in comparison to other issues? I don't know.
Yeah, I do think so. I feel like no CD, it's from my brain. I think OCD has more stigma attached to it. And I feel like there's a stereotype of what OCD is versus the reality of OCD. And I just don't see that with any other mental health disorder. Like, we all know what depression is. We all know what anxiety is. We all know what an eating disorder is on the surface. But OCD, what everyone thinks they know of what OCD is, not the reality, or it's like the tip of the iceberg. And so that becomes frustrating. Oh, I'm so OCD. And so it's used, the vernacular is used, and people are struggling with all sorts of themes that are like not consistent with that. And so they do feel alone. I think they feel more alone than having an anxiety disorder or depression. I mean, those are very isolating, but you don't feel like you don't have your disorder, like I'm not clean, or I don't line things up. Like, so I must not have OCD. I don't wash my hands. I'm having intrusive thoughts that I might be gay. Well, that's weird. Why do I have that? There's no name for that. So when you find out there is a name for that, and that's incredibly common, it's like one of the most common, then it's like, what? Why aren't people talking about this? Right. And then I think there's that passion that says, I'm going to go spread the word, because that's crazy that people aren't talking about this. Maybe that's part of it.
I think that's totally it. I would never have talked about my story until I got the sense that how debilitating it was for my daughter. And I've opened up, and my wife didn't even know. My wife didn't know.
There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of
I
shame.
never, and so, but there's this between people like you, no OCD, other people that are doing wonderful things around it. It actually is becoming, you're right, more normal. And so my personal openness to be on your podcast and talk about my own personal, issue, I would never have done that. But now I feel like the community, it's like, why not? I mean, why not? Why? It's important that everybody can figure it out sooner than later, because, what I've learned from my conversations with Stephen and the research that they've done, and I'm going to tell you the stuff that it's 10x the probability of somebody, dying by suicide than people that have other mental health challenges. It's 10x.
Yeah.
And the cost of not diagnosing the person with OCD, the healthcare cost is, I don't remember what the number was like thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars more for the care of a person with OCD who never comes clean about what their real issue is and doesn't get the right therapy or doesn't get the right therapy.
Yeah. Right.
So it's important that people are more comfortable to talk about it. And so it's important that people like you are doing what you're doing. And I say thank you so much for doing it.
Well, and I appreciate you guys adding your voice to the stories, because I think this will have a huge impact on people listening to add to the normalization that not only do our kids have these things, but also that we have these things, and that it brings up these things, and there is help, and there is evidence-based help, that it's easy to access. And I mean, think Eve, like your story of being able to get that support and really finding comfort in your therapist and needing that like weekly touch point while you're at college and you're doing it yourself. I think that's just beautiful.
It took a lot of time. I'm so grateful for my parents, especially. I had one day basically where I sat and I came clean. And I think if I didn't do that, I don't know what would have happened. Genuinely, it was kind of destroying my life. And so I just think throughout it all, like I would never take anything back. I don't think. I think this makes you such also a stronger and a better human being just by going through something that's so like not like it's kind of extravagant. I think it's very life-changing, but I think it really makes you a better person. And I'm really honestly grateful that it happened to me. I think I would have been a lot different. So
Yeah. Well, and I think that says a lot about therapy. It makes you more resilient. Well, thank you both for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. It's such a powerful story.
Thank you for letting us do it. And it's been an honor. It really has.
Thank you so much.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Love my daughter so much. So proud of her. As tough as it gets to fight, to work through something like this. I could not be more proud of her.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You have a good dad, even.
I know, I really do. Best friend.
Well, I hope that you found that helpful. I really enjoyed their story and how open they were to discussing their struggles. And also, I think they really highlight the importance of making sure to find the right therapist, because if she got the wrong therapist, which she did for quite a while, she's not going to get better. They're just going to sit there and discuss these intrusive thoughts as if they're legitimate. So definitely check out treatmyocd.com or go to IOCDF and find a trained OCD therapist. So I hope that you are finding these podcasts helpful. Don't forget to check out the AT Parenting community if you want really in-depth support from me and hundreds of other parents in the community. We normally have about a little over maybe 1,200 parents in there, and we would all love to support you. Check it out at atparentingcommunity.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, if you can hit a star or write a review, I greatly appreciate that. And I always like to show my gratitude by reading one of them if there's been a new one. And there was, and I want to thank Cook LJB. I wanted to thank them for writing a review. They wrote, "There aren't enough stars." And I appreciate that. Natasha Daniels is an absolute gem. Where to begin with how much this woman's resources have helped me and our family and countless others who have looked to her guidance. The variety and wealth of information that she possesses and the way she implements the dissemination of this information to help families across all areas of anxiety and OCD is just remarkable. Her clinical expertise, coupled with the fact that she's raising children of her own with some of these very same issues, making it very personal to her, makes her an absolute expert on this topic. Her level of commitment to sharing this knowledge and making it accessible in a variety of different forms is what brings it all together and makes her so very helpful. I don't talk to a single person that mentions child anxiety or OCD without bringing up Natasha's name and referring them to her myriad resources for help. This review is a long time coming because I've been using Natasha's resources for at least the last 4 years in a variety of different ways, and here I am coming back to listen to one of her podcasts again today. I thought it well past time that I leave the review that she so deeply deserves. Thank you, Natasha. Aw, that was such a nice review. Thank you for taking the time to write that. I really appreciate that. It's so nice. And I love how you hit a bump and you circle back after all these years, and I'm still here to support you and I'm still a resource for you. And that is my ultimate goal, is I'm just here as a resource on tap. So thank you for that. Maybe if you write a review, talking to you guys out there, I'll be reading your review next time. And don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And for those of you that joined the community, I'll be seeing you soon on our Zoom welcome call. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.